Okay, thank you. As the director of the Schemmel Forum at the University of Scranton, I consider it an honor to collaborate with Keep Our Republic in this essential project. The Schemmel Forum is a continuing education for enrichment program for out of school adults. Our members enjoy learning together, and we strive to focus on ideas and issues that matter. Democracy in crisis and our upcoming election matter most to all of us at this moment in history, um, because it is, in short, our democracy, our crisis, and our election. That means it is our problem and our challenge. Democracy is always a work in progress, and in order to make progress and address crises, we cannot be bystanders. We must be active and engaged citizens. That's our job. As the late Supreme Court Justice Louis Brandeis noted, the most important job Americans have is the job of citizen. From the beginning, when Benjamin Franklin noted in 1787 that we were a republic if we could keep it, and to 1863, Abraham Lincoln asking whether a nation like ours could endure. We were warned that the existence and evolution of our democracy depends on us. So now in 2020, we must ask that question, can we endure? And we must answer yes. The endurance and evolution of our democracy is in our hands. It is our job. It is our precious right to assume responsibility for it. It's the kind of poetic justice that the discussion is taking place 15 days before the election here in Scranton, the place where one particular candidate was born. We have four-star panel of national figures and a highly experienced moderator, Professor of Political Science, Jean Harris at the University of Scranton. Dr. Harris is a co-author of American Democracy Now. Her current research focuses on women as political actors. She's been actively engaged in encouraging students and others in this community to vote and assume a civic responsibility. Please welcome her to the podium. Jean Harris.
Thank you, Sondra, and welcome to everybody. Elections are a hiring process. And in our representative democracy, we, the citizens, hire government officials to work for us. And they are supposed to protect our lives, our liberties, and pursuit of happiness, while also ensuring safety, justice, and general welfare for all. This year, we, the voters, will hire the president and the vice president for 4-year terms. In addition, in the 2020 elections, voters in all 50 states will hire their representatives in the U.S. House, and voters in 35 states will also hire their members, one member to the U.S. Senate, one of their 2 members. Here in Pennsylvania, in addition to those, we also will be hiring the state's attorney general, the state's auditor general, and the state's treasurer. And in our state legislative body, we will be electing representatives to the Pennsylvania State House, and also in 25 senatorial districts in the state, representatives to the Senate. All of these are important elections. However, the election that's getting the most attention, obviously, is that of US president. According to a Pew survey, 83% of registered voters say that it really matters who wins the presidency in 2020. And that's up. In 4 years ago, 74% said it really matters. So people see these elections as really important. Unfortunately, there are many concerns this year about the elections. Pew also reports that in July, about 49% of registered voters expected to have difficulties casting their ballots. And that number probably has only gone up since July. This is very different from 2 years ago. In 2018, 85% of registered voters said it would be easy to vote. A recent NBC News SurveyMonkey poll found that 59% of Americans were not too confident or not confident at all that the November election would be conducted in a free and equal way. And that's true for the majority of Republicans, Democrats, and independents. They all share this lack of confidence in the integrity of this year's elections. So tonight, we'll talk about a range of concerns that people have. about this year's elections. And we also want to discuss measures we can take to ensure safe, fair, and valid elections. So we have, as Sondra said, a distinguished panel. And what I'd like to do before we engage in the conversation is to introduce each of the panelists in alphabetical order. So first, I'll introduce Charlie Dent. Charlie served as a member of the U.S. House of Representatives for Pennsylvania's 15th Congressional District from 2005 to 2018. And between 2015 and 2017, he also served as the chair of the House Ethics Committee. Before his election to the U.S. Congress, Charlie was a member of the Pennsylvania State Senate for 5 years, and before that, he was a member of the Pennsylvania House of Representatives for 7 years. Currently, Charlie is a senior policy advisor to DLA Piper, a contributor to CNN, a visiting fellow at the University of Pennsylvania, and a distinguished advisor to Pew Charitable Trusts. Charlie earned a bachelor's degree in international politics at Penn State University and a master's degree in public administration from Lehigh University. Thanks for being with us tonight, Charlie. Dick Gephardt served for 28 years in the U.S. House of Representatives, representing Missouri's 3rd Congressional District. He also served as Majority Leader from 1989 to 1995 and the House Minority Leader from 1995 to 2003. From 2009 to 2013, Dick served as chairman of the National Endowment for Democracy. Currently, he serves as the chair of the Board of Trustees, of Scripps Research Institute. He's also a member of the Board of Directors at the Washington Center of Internships and Academic Seminars, and a member of the Council on Foreign Relations. Dick is the founder of the Gephardt Institute for Civic and Community Engagement at Washington University. He began his public service at the local level of government in the city of St. Louis after earning a bachelor's degree at Northwestern University and his Juris Doctorate from the University of Michigan Law School. Thank you for being here this evening. Mary McCord serves as a legal director and senior litigator at the Institute for Constitutional Advocacy and Protection at Georgetown University Law Center, where she is also a visiting professor. At the Institute for Constitutional Advocacy and Protection, Mary leads a team that brings constitutional impact litigation at all levels of federal and state courts across a wide variety of public interest issues. Mary is a member of the new National Task Force on Election Crises. She served in the U.S. Department of Justice during the Obama administration for 2 years as the principal deputy assistant attorney for the National Security Division, and then as the acting assistant attorney for that division. Prior to her service in the Department of Justice, Mary was an assistant U.S. attorney for nearly 20 years at the U.S. Attorney's Office for the District of Columbia. And Mary graduated from Georgetown University Law School. Thank you for being here. David Thornburgh. Since 2014, David has served as president and CEO of the Committee of 70, a Philadelphia-based good government group. He came to the Committee of 70 after serving as the executive director for the Fells Institute of Government at the University of Pennsylvania. David's long career as a civic connector began at the Cigna Corporation, where he served as the director of civic affairs. He then served as the director of the Wharton Small Business Development Center. David later served as the executive director of the Economy League of Greater Philadelphia and as the CEO for the Alliance of Regional Stewardship. David earned a bachelor's degree in political science from Haverford College and a master's in public policy from Harvard University's Kennedy School of Government. So this is our distinguished group of panelists who will talk with us this evening about the integrity of our elections. So I want to just start with some opening thoughts from everybody, and we'll go in alphabetical order, but starting with Dick, since we already started the introductions with Charlie, so we'll rotate. So just your opening thoughts on the unique challenges to the integrity of our 2020 elections as a starting point. So Dick, your thoughts.
So it's great to be with you, and I thank the university for holding this forum, and I'm also pleased to be with Charlie Dent, who's was a great member of Congress and has done great things after Congress. It's a pleasure to always be with him. And I was on another panel with Mary and David a few weeks back, and that was a great experience. They're great people. They'll have great comments. So I'm really thrilled to be with you tonight. Let me kind of start where I became pretty worried about this election in November of 2020. About 7 or 8 months ago, when the pandemic was in full swing, I became really worried because I realized that we were going to have a lot of mail-in ballots because people were going to be afraid of going in person to vote because they were afraid of getting the virus. And as I looked at it, I began to talk to some of my former colleagues from both parties, and we came together about 3 months ago with one of the groups we have is called Keep Our Republic, the Ben Franklin comment after the Constitution was created. And we began looking at all the unconventional threats that we thought might happen in this election during what has been termed the long count. In states like Pennsylvania, it could take a week. It could even take 2 weeks to count the mail-in ballots. And with the fact that the country is deeply polarized, we could be into a real mess in that period when the counting is still going on and we don't have a winner of the election. And you're at a point because of the polarization that both sides think the other side is already cheating. And you have people on both sides who are saying they're not willing to accept the results because they don't think the process is fair. And that is an ingredient for a really tough time in this democracy. And I was leader, as you said, in the House for 14 years. And I saw a lot of really controversial issues decided by the House of Representatives and the Congress. And at the end of those votes, I was always in awe that the losing side was willing to grudgingly accept the results of the vote. And they did that. They were willing to do that because they thought the process that we were operating under was fair. That's what we're in danger of not being able to do in this election. So we have been working on a variety of efforts to try to help this election be valid and successful, and so that we, for after 240 years of doing this, can do it again. We're running ads with a group called a National Council for Election Integrity. We have 40 members of it. Half of them are Republicans, half of them are Democrats. Those ads are already running in Pennsylvania, I believe. And their basic message is, we've done this in other times of national crisis, and we can do it now. But after the votes, after the election day, because the voting could take a long time, the counting, we all have to be patient. We have to demand that every vote is counted fairly and accurately. And if there are demonstrations after the election because of all this, we have to reject violence. We have to remain patient and peaceful and allow the election officials to count the votes to find out who has finally won. So that's what I've been involved in. I'm going to keep working on it with our other members. Charlie has talked to our group, and he's been a great help, especially with Pennsylvania, which is going to be a very important state in this equation.
Thank you. Mary, would you like to make some comments on this?
Sure. Just following up on the Congressman's statements, one of the unique challenges this year too is just the quantity of disinformation that abounds about the election from disinformation about mail-in balloting being more susceptible to fraud, to disinformation, as the congressman indicated, about any delay in the tabulating of the votes must be the result of a rigged election or cheating. And unfortunately, these type of statements, particularly when made from the highest levels of our government by the president himself, are really dog whistles for some of the more extreme elements in our society. And it's a topic I really wish that we didn't need to talk about, but having spent most of my career in public safety and law enforcement, my motto has always been, I'd rather be prepared and hope for the worst. I mean, hope for the best, but prepare for the worst. Sorry, Freudian slip there. And hopefully we can all toast that we don't need the preparation. But one of the things my organization at Georgetown has been doing nonstop now for several weeks is trying to correct the record on the unlawfulness of private paramilitary organizations, because we have unfortunately seen over the last 6-8 months a real increase in the public presence of these unlawful groups. And of course, everybody has heard about what happened in Michigan, the plot to kidnap the governor by members of an unlawful militia. And I think that highlights the actual threat that some of these groups present. Now, I will say that is a more extreme group than many of them are. But anytime you talk about private individuals arming themselves with assault rifles and either in opposition to the state, such as those in Michigan, or even in purporting to augment law enforcement, such as maybe coming out to protect against voter fraud, coming out to protect against fraud in the tabulation of the votes. These are groups that have no legal authority under state or federal law to exist as militias. Well-regulated militia in the Constitution means regulated by the state. We can talk more about that later. Second Amendment doesn't protect them. It protects an individual right to bear arms for one's own individual self-protection. And all 50 states prohibit it, baked into their constitutional and statutory schemes. And so my organization has been trying to empower state and local officials as well as voters to understand this activity is not lawful. It could lead to voter intimidation. We're urging people to make public statements about it. We're urging voters to be on the lookout for it, but also encouraging voters to vote, 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 because the best antidote to this type of threat is to show up in massive numbers where voter intimidation will be impossible. So I'm glad to be able to contribute the conversation and hope to answer questions when we get to that.
Thank you. And clearly we are seeing large numbers of voters doing the early voting, both in person and by mail. So people are indeed voting in large numbers. David, your initial thoughts on the integrity of these elections.
Sure, Gene, and it's a real pleasure to join Speaker Gephardt and Mary again, and to be with my friend Charlie Dent. I look forward to a great conversation. I have to satisfy the curiosity of those who are watching to explain my backdrop. This is a Volkswagen camper that my organization has had wrapped with various messages about the importance of voting and making our vote count. So now the Volkswagen has turned into the Volkswagen. So that explains that. I would underscore what Speaker Gephardt and Mary just said. Those are key concerns I think we all have, but I'll plow some new ground around things that my organization is doing. One of the things that we can control between now and the end of election day or election week or election month is we can do our best to educate voters about, particularly this is true in Pennsylvania, about new policies, procedures, options, choices. The fewer voters who, let's just say, make a mistake in filling out their mail ballot, that relieves, that's one less vote that can be challenged or ruled invalid. There's been a lot of attention paid in Pennsylvania to the so-called naked ballot, which I've said to people is the least sexy use of the word naked that you could imagine, which simply means that you have to enclose a mail ballot in an inner envelope and then an outer envelope, sign it, fill it out, and it's complete. Without two envelopes, your ballot, according to a court ruling, will be ruled invalid. So that's an example of what we can do. And my organization, again, we've been around for 116 years, and educating and engaging voters is a core plank in our platform, if you will. But I do have concerns that if voters are not sure or they're anxious, they'll either not show up, not vote by mail, or they'll make a mistake and therefore their ballots will be ruled invalid. So I'll just leave it at that. We have lots to talk about, but I like that one because it is something we can do something about between now and then. I'm sure all of us share that goal. So again, thanks for allowing me to be part of this. And I look forward to the conversation.
Thank you. Charlie, your initial thoughts on the upcoming challenges. Charlie, you're muted at this point. You need to unmute.
Sorry. I thought I'd start by saying that first, thank you to the University of Scranton. It's great to be with everybody on this call with Leader Gephardt again, and it's just a real pleasure. But I wanted to just say this about what my observations. The headline in today's Allentown Morning Call was this: 2.6 million absentee, 2.6 million mail-in ballot requests in Pennsylvania. So you think about that for a second. That's a lot of mail-in requests in a state about of 13 million people. And so I guess my first message to everybody is to the people of Pennsylvania is to be patient and manage expectations, that we might not have an outcome on election night and that it could take days or perhaps a few weeks before we know the final outcome. And that's okay. But we just have to just get our heads around that concept. And one thing I wanted to mention too, I am a lot less worried about voter fraud or even voter suppression. Some Republicans are yelling voter fraud, some Democrats are yelling voter suppression. I'm more worried about voter system failure. That is, the system doesn't work for whatever reasons. And I'm going to use Pennsylvania as the example because this is the first time the Commonwealth has allowed for no excuse absentee voting, which, we've always had absentee voting for an excuse. You're going to be out of town that day, or you're ill, or you're in the hospital. You have a legitimate reason you can't go to the polls in person. But this is the first time we've done it with for no excuses. And the primary, that was our test run with lower voter turnouts and lower volumes. There were some challenges and some problems. The system just wasn't quite up to the standard I think we'd all like. It was spotty. In some areas it worked well, and others it didn't work as well. So there were just some problems in its implementation. Nothing nefarious, just trying to work out the kinks. But so I'm really just worried about postal failure. We're worried about the mail. This is an anecdote. Just yesterday, I put my son's absentee voter application in the mail. In my own mailbox, and here that was yesterday morning, and it's last I checked, it's about 7 o'clock tonight. The mailman still hasn't come and picked it up. I might be a new mail guy. I'm just saying that the mail seems to be slower, so that could be an issue with all these mail-in votes, postal failure. Another issue that I'm very much concerned about, and David touched on it, but he called it something different. I call it the secrecy envelope. That you're supposed to put your ballot in before you put it in the outer envelope that actually has your name on it. And those votes will be discounted if you forget to put your ballot in the secrecy envelope. And so that there are going to be issues like that. And, in other states, it could be a witness or a signature. So I worry about those types of issues heading into this election. And what votes may be disqualified, of course. And I mentioned, delayed tallies that could result in not knowing the outcome for a few days. And of course, the challenge in our country is that I always say we don't have a national election in the United States. We have 50 state elections, and the states really govern how they conduct those elections, and they have their own idiosyncrasies and rules and procedures that vary from jurisdiction to jurisdiction. So there are going to be all sorts of challenges in that regard. And of course, the other issue is it's not helpful when one of the presidential candidates, the president in particular, makes repeated comments about the system being rigged and questioning outcomes and fraud and all those sorts of things. That helps, that undermines a lot of people's confidence in our election system, which I think overall and by and large has been, very successful, and these elections have been run fairly and smoothly throughout my lifetime. In most cases, we've had some issues from time to time, to be sure, but overall we have a pretty good track record, and I think we're just all concerned because of the the pandemic and the stresses. And the one little bright spot that I've seen in this state, it seems that we're doing pretty well with poll workers. We were all concerned back in June that there were not going to be enough poll workers in a state like ours to man the polls out of fear of the pandemic or whatever other reasons. But it seems to me that we are doing considerably well in that regard in this state. One other issue I am concerned about within the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, and this may be true in other states, the General Assembly and the governor haven't come to an agreement yet on how to deal with allowing the counting of votes, of these mail-in votes prior to election day, which will slow things up. A lot of us would like to see these votes begin to be tallied before then. Of course, not without divulging any results, but give us maybe a week to 10 days or 2 weeks to start counting. So these are just some of the issues. So voter system failure, a new system in Pennsylvania, and it might not run as smoothly as we would have expected in previous cycles. So that, I thought I'd stop. We're going to hear a lot of questions from our friends, and again, great to be with these panelists, all friends.
Thank you, everybody, for getting us started here. Lots to talk about, obviously. So my next question, and Mary, I hope you will start answering this one. Are election laws, both national and state, are election laws clear? And are our political and judicial institutions up to the task of what is ahead with this election? So Mary, you go first.
Well, some of the laws are clear, some are not. Laws that establish deadlines, for example, are very clear. One that is often on people's mind is, can the president change the date of the election? No, he cannot. That is established by Congress. Another is, can the president or anyone else change the date of the actual transition of power, if there's a transition of power, inauguration on January 20th? No, that is set in the Constitution. So some things are clear. Other things are much less clear. There is a statute called the Electoral Account Act, and this is the statute that governs the counting of the ballots by the electors. Because as you go to the polls to vote, even though your ballot will ask you who you're voting for president and who you're voting for vice president, those votes are really votes for a slate of electors. And so there is a very complicated statute called the Electoral Account Act, which purports to resolve problems that might happen if there is a contest about the slate of electors or a contest in the counting. That statute is somewhat inscrutable. It consists of a very, very long sentence with a lot of intermediate clauses, and election experts and constitutional law experts and voting experts are working very hard to put forth the best interpretations of how that law should be applied if there is some contest between whether the slates of electors being put forth by the states are valid. And I'm not going to go into every jot and tittle about it because I think it would be very confusing. The National Task Force on Election Crises is a bipartisan task force that has put out, and when I'm not speaking, I'll try to link to it here in the chat, has put out guidance on the Electoral Account Act, and there are other bipartisan groups that are doing the same. This is the kind of issue that could, of course, find itself in the courts if there is a contest over how this act is applied, or a contest just over any other aspect of the tabulation of the votes. We've certainly seen it before in Bush v. Gore. And so, it's something where I don't think any of us really want to see this go to the courts. We'd like to be able to see it to be resolved through without even having to go through the Electoral Account Act's provisions for resolving conflict, frankly. And so I think the best way to ensure that is to be as faithful, not undermine any legitimacy in the vote. There's no reason to do so. David can talk at length about the confidence he has in the Pennsylvania system, notwithstanding the potential for various breakdowns that Charlie referenced to. The actual voting itself in terms of the tabulation is something I think we should have confidence in. So we're just going to hope that this doesn't go to the courts. That's where I will leave that.
Gene, let me just jump in a second there. And I say this with some humility, being a non-legislator and a non-lawyer. But my observation is that the laws that are most vulnerable in this process and others are those that haven't really been tested. And I would say, with all due respect to the illustrious legislators on this panel, sometimes legislators pass laws without really understanding how they can be executed or implemented. And then they end up in the courts. And, if we've never done this before, then we're really, I think, peering over a potentially chaotic precipice. But I get concerned about a class of those laws in Pennsylvania and elsewhere that relate to ballot challenges. Again, we have them on the books, particularly for mail ballot challenges, but we've never seen anywhere near the volume of mail ballots that we're experiencing this year. We're experiencing a volume, as Charlie pointed out, about 10 times what we saw in 2016. So you combine the potential high volume of challenges for different reasons and a time frame that actually turns out to be pretty short, particularly if it takes a few weeks to actually finish the count, and law that just plain hasn't been tested. That to me those are ingredients for a very troublesome and potentially chaotic situation. So that as we get closer to this, I think it would do us all well just to learn a little bit more about what is supposed to happen, what could happen, even if it's a low probability, recognize that it has some high consequence. So so that's about it for me, as I said, as the non-lawyer and non-legislator.
Well, thank you, David. Charlie, did you want to respond to the clearness or lack thereof of our laws and our courts getting involved?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I mean, David's right. I mean, legislators do pass laws and they're not always thinking clearly about the execution and implementation of those laws. And I too worry that the courts, may intervene here. I'm really hoping it doesn't get to that point. If there's a decisive win, that might, we're gonna have this conversation might be entirely moot. But I share his concerns. And by the way, I take back what I just said about the post office. My wife just said everything just came in, and I received my ballot in the mail, as did she. So my actual ballot.
Well timed.
And I'd be happy. I know, well timed. She just handed it to me. So I take it back. So the Postal Service apparently is working in my neighborhood. But no, I don't have too much else to add. But no, it's a fair point that I am, just enormously concerned that if we go to court in various states around the country, that it's going to be up to judges to try to decipher what the actual intent of the legislature was. There are going to be challenges too, like in our state of Pennsylvania. I think all the ballots have to be received by the close of the election, by election day. And, there are going to be some coming in late. A few days late, I think the Supreme Court ruled that we could count those that arrive about 3 days after the election, up to 3 days after the election. And so we're going to have all these types of issues. We've always had the issue of overseas ballots. Sometimes they get delayed. And I just worry that, within a political context, when you have, maybe a candidate out there, questioning the outcome of the results, that will just further incite the country to, to not respond well, to the events on the ground.
I'd like to go back to something Mary said that I think is really important. One of the things she said was that there are some definite time parameters in various laws that affect this whole process. And one of them, I think, is that the states have to report to the Congress or the Electoral College their results so their electors can be sent to Congress to be tabulated. One of the problems we face in a state like Pennsylvania is that, as I get it, under present law, and I think the legislature is still considering a change in this, they can't even start opening mail-in ballots until the day of the election. And that just means the time to count these ballots is going to be stretched out further in the future. If the state could pass a law, a change in that law to allow them even 3 or 4 days before the election to start preparing those, taking them out of their jackets, getting them ready to count, that would really help the timing of the count. Because one of our worries is that, let's say Pennsylvania can't get it done by early December when they're supposed to announce their results. You could be in a situation like we were with Gore v. Bush in the year 2000, where, as I understand it, the Florida legislature was thinking of sending the slate of electors that they wanted to send because they couldn't get a result out of the counting process. So that's a danger we face in a state like Pennsylvania. So I'm really hoping the legislature can remedy that by giving the people who are polls trying to count these votes a little more time to get it done.
Let me just third that recommendation. That's an issue we've been on, doing everything we can to urge legislators to take that up, because they could make that change in the next week or so and still give counties plenty of time to process the ballots. It's not a change that affects voters. It's a change that just gives counties, all 67 of them, a little more breathing room to do their job.
And it's my understanding that a task force that looked at primary elections with all the new voting systems and whatnot here in Pennsylvania, one of their recommendations was indeed to do that, to at least give 3 days before election day, even 7 would be better. And so the legislators have known that this is a request since the middle of the summer, that, it would be a nice thing if we had more time to count ballots. And when you look at the numbers that are requesting the mail-ins, as Charlie suggested, that's a big issue. And so with that in mind, what can be done and by whom to prepare people for the delay that we all expect between election day and the certification of the popular vote, the electoral vote, which is supposed to happen December 14th, and moving on into the Congress. So what can be done and by whom to prepare people so that they recognize election night, we're not necessarily going to know the winner. David, you want to start with that?
Sure, I'll just say briefly, I'll just repeat what Charlie said at the outset: patience, patience, patience.
Mhm.
I'd also suggest a little history goes a long way. I'm in the midst of reading a book called The Fraud of the Century, which is about the 1876 election between Rutherford Hayes and Samuel Tilden. So if we want to prevent and not relapse into that kind of a chaotic nightmare, I suspect that a little history goes a long way. Because I think that is what produced the Electoral Account Act. Am I right, Mary? Is it? So this, and I won't go into the details because I'm only halfway through the book, but it's my heavens, it's quite a story. So let's pay a little attention to history.
And to back up what David just said, our group, the National Council for Election Integrity, is already running ads and social media in Pennsylvania on this question of patience. And our budget is much larger for the day after the election, because that's when things really get crazy. So we're going to be running a lot of social media, a lot of TV ads in states like Pennsylvania to try to help people be patient, be peaceful, be nonviolent, and wait for these votes to be counted. I just want to say one word. I think Charlie mentioned this. The election officials in all states are really going to try to, they're already doing a good job. And they're going to be at this for days after election day. This is going to be an unusual election. And these people are brave to be out there doing this. They're worried about the virus like we all are. And so I need to give a shout out to these people that are going to make this process work. They are really doing democracy's work.
Yeah, and I think we should also note, I agree with Leader Gephardt completely, that I don't know of one election official in any jurisdiction in the country that wants a problem. I mean, nobody wants to be the center of the storm. They want these things to run smoothly, regardless of their own biases or affiliations politically. They want these things to work. And so in order, and I think to reassure the public, it's imperative that not only elected leaders, but these county election officials and again, local officials stand up and tell them, we are going to have, we may not have results election night. And by the way, we should also inform voters too, even when we do have results, they are unofficial results on election night. It usually takes several days or a few weeks before we get the official certification of the vote. So I think we've become somewhat spoiled, at least in the 20th century and into the 21st century, that we expect immediate results. And I suspect throughout much of our history that was not always the case. We did not have immediate results. It took time, and we just have to, again, I just get back to patience. Just if enough of us keep talking about this, people who are paying attention tonight, please tell your friends, please communicate, write letters, do what you have to reassure the public that things will be well, but it might take a little time.
I'd just like to take that one step further. One of my attempted antidotes to misinformation and disinformation that Mary talked about is to encourage people to turn to local sources if they have concerns or anxieties, if they want to know what's going on. Because as Charlie points out, counties run elections. The president doesn't run elections. So if you want to understand a process or what could go wrong or how we do things, then turn to your local officials and ask your questions. And they are dedicated, nonpartisan professionals. There are no operatives hiding in this county or that county trying to swing an election. So I can't say that strongly enough.
Thanks. Mary, would you like to add anything?
I think a lot here has been covered. I see some of the questions coming in, and I don't want to jump the gun, but as we've been all talking about this and the importance of trying to, if it's even still possible, be able to start counting beforehand, it is important because the problems that some of us are highlighting that could lead to conflicts would arise, for example, if the votes are not yet counted by a certain date in December, and it's a date at which the electors need to meet. And if there is a disagreement about which slate of electors for the current incumbent president or for the challenger is the one that carries the state, that's how we could result in this type of conflict of slates of electors. That's what would trigger various provisions under the Electoral Account Act, which, going back to David's and Charlie's and others' points, is something that hasn't really been fully tested out in the courts. And so there's a lot of ambiguity about exactly how that act would apply in that type of situation. I do urge you to go to the task force. I put the link in the chat because there's actually a resource, a paper on this that spells out in more detail than you'd ever want to know how this could work.
Thank you. So a little bit in terms of election day, I know there's lots of concerns by people about voter intimidation. We certainly have seen an increase in gun sales for many reasons, including the pandemic and whatnot. And so should we be prepared for election day scuffles and violence? And if so, again, who is the we and what should we do? And voter intimidation, obviously there's laws that make that illegal. I read an article today about a program in Michigan called Collars and Lawyers. And so they have lawyers and ministers, religious men and women who will be at the polls on election day to help answer questions and try to tone down if they see some tensions and whatnot, which I thought was a really interesting effort. And some of these ministers who are involved have done that in the past, so this is not something new to them. But so again, the question is, if we have to worry about intimidation and possibly violence, what should we do beforehand? What can be done on election day? And even as we now have lines of people voting already. And so, Charlie, I guess we'll start with you if you have some reaction to voter intimidation and concerns about violence on election day or thereafter.
Yeah. I guess I'm probably a little less concerned about violence on election day than I am in the aftermath, where there could be with an unresolved result, and people are impatient, and candidates are questioning the legitimacy and the integrity of the voting process. I think that could perhaps lead to some unrest, and I do worry about it. Now, of course, the issue on election day to me is if I want to make sure that the polling places are properly staffed, and that and hopefully the counties in preparation have identified those voting precincts where they are apt to have longer lines. And by the way, I know in Georgia, I keep seeing that they say the longer lines are in minority districts. In my own county, I always noticed that they tended to be in the more Republican areas where they had longer lines. The point being is that the county officials need to be on their game to make sure that they have enough machines and enough locations, voting locations, in areas of very high turnout. And they have to make sure of that, because there could always be potential for some kind of disturbance at these polling places when people are standing in line for hours. I mean, they're more likely to be agitated, and bad things could happen. But again, I'm more worried the day after the election about any unrest in the event the election is close and we don't have an outcome. And if the president continues, if he's behind and he's questioning it. And also think about this whole notion of what many are calling the red mirage versus the blue shift, because Democratic voters seem to be requesting mail-in ballots at a much greater rate than Republicans, and Republicans seem to be wanting to vote at the polls in person more so than the Democrats. You could see a situation where maybe the president is doing better on election night, but as the mail-ins are counted over the following days and weeks, that you could see a shift, and that could also lead to mischief and others questioning the results and the outcome.
Let me just speak up for Philadelphia for a second, because somehow the president and others have decided that Philadelphia is sort of the epicenter of all voter fraud and potential intimidation and violence. And Philadelphia is an old big city like St. Louis, and we've been doing politics for a long time, and I won't deny that we haven't encountered problems, but everything has gotten so blown out of proportion, and it's really disheartening to me as someone that's lived in the city for about 25 years and I'm doing what I'm doing. So this is another area where I think a little patience and calm comes in handy. And then, I'm intrigued, Gene, by the example that you talked about, because I think ultimately the best pushback on intimidation or potential violence is essentially the norms of the local political culture. It's just basically say, we don't do that here. And if that involves the faith community or other upstanding citizens, we've interestingly got a number of restaurants, and Philadelphia has a lot of great restaurants, who are now organizing to serve people food if they're waiting in line for the polls. So just their presence there, I think, sends a signal that says, here's the way we're playing this. Nobody's getting out of hand. We have norms and expectations. And oh, by the way, I'm confident that our law enforcement community has built a network of capacity to respond to potential challenges. So it's not all Quaker friendliness. But I do believe that this will be a time for communities to stand up and invoking whoever is trusted and respected in the community and say, this is not what we do here.
And I'd love to pipe
Thanks.
in there as well, if it's okay. So in Philadelphia last week, the district attorney, Larry Krasner, held a press conference, and he was on stage with election officials, local elected officials, a state senator, faith leaders from his community, and I was on by video. And he did this in order to send a unified, powerful statement that your vote count, your vote is important. As the district attorney and all of the officials with him, they want to ensure people that they are there to protect their right to vote. They take voter intimidation seriously. They take any type of armed paramilitary activity or armed intimidation seriously. He mobilized his office task force weeks before the election to be prepared to take any incoming calls of voter intimidation. Normally they only do that on election day, but they're already at work. And he talked about having talked to the police commissioner about it. And, we passed out our fact sheets so that people know. And we have myself and other lawyers standing by also for calls to help, DAs like Larry Krasner, and to help other communities if they need more legal sort of backup to try to prevent any type of voter intimidation. Again, we hope none of this will be necessary, but those type of powerful statements within communities, not just by one individual, right, but by the whole community, are so important. I addressed the U.S. Conference of Mayors last week and major city chiefs, and we all talked about how in each community at that local level, it's important right now for the police chief, the district attorney, the mayor, the elected officials, and the community leaders outside government and election officials to sit down and have a plan, right, for how they're going to create this safe environment, how they're going to keep tensions down, denouncing any type of violence, not only for election day, but in the time after. And I can't agree more that I think it starts at that local level. Reject any violence, regardless of what ideology is motivating it.
Thank you. Dick, did you want to add anything to this part of the conversation?
No, I think everything that's been said is absolutely right. The local election officials are really intent. They know the problems, and they're going to do everything they can. So we've got to really support them. We got to thank them if we go vote in person. They are doing the really great work for our democracy.
And again, the reality of our hiring process, our elections, is while we have national and state law, it's often the local county and other officials and local police officers and whatnot who really, again, are on the front line and are the ones who are actually implementing these laws. And those are some of the folks who have also suggested the concerns and how they need to be addressed. And so the local community is really important always, but in this year particularly. So going from the local communities kind of out to the broader, recently we've had reports indicating that Russia in particular, but also China and Iran are working to try to influence the outcome of our elections. How dangerous do you see foreign interference in the integrity of our elections? And what is it that government or maybe other institutions, media, social media, what is it that they can do to try to rein in those threats? And what are they doing? What more can we do? So Dick, we'll start with you if that's okay.
Sure. Again, a lot of work has been done in the last 4 years on this at all levels of government. I know the secretaries of state have come together, the attorneys general, and they have really tried to figure out what can happen and try to guard against it. They tried to supplement their infrastructure so that they are more reliant and defend themselves against foreign actors coming in and messing things up. We don't know how much of this is going to go on, has been going on. If you listen to our intelligence officials, like Dan Coates and others, this is still going on. It's been going on, and it will continue to go on. and it's very hard to shut it all out. I wish the president was more concerned about this and supported the efforts of his own intelligence officials to make greater progress. I was alarmed during the last few years when the evidence came out that the Russians had broken into the voter registration files in Florida. I don't know how serious that was and if it could happen again. But again, we just have to hope that the local officials, the state officials working with our intelligence officials have safeguarded this infrastructure better than it was in 2016, and that we don't have any big outbreaks of hacking and messing up the voting infrastructure.
We're losing Dick a little bit, so he's frozen. So I'm gonna see if Mary wants to add to that, and hopefully we'll be able to get Dick moving again.
For social media, it's clear that a lot of different people, I think on the social media front,
Dick, you're coming in and out, so I'm going to maybe if you mute and come back in a minute, we'll be able to hear what you're saying. I apologize. So Mary, would you?
So I was still in government in the National Security Division when we were going through the 2016 election. And I think we're seeing a lot of the same tactics being deployed by Vladimir Putin as well as the Chinese. And I think one thing we need to be clear about, in many ways, I'm less worried about which foreign adversary is advocating which particular candidate, because what's really in the best interest of Russia and what Putin is the most interested in is sowing discord right here at home, regardless of whether President Trump wins or Joe Biden wins. What he wants to do, what benefits Russia, and we've seen this time and again, is to sow discord, the kind of discord that unfortunately we are seeing happening in our communities across the country. And so it is incumbent upon our social media platforms to be vigilant about this. They've been extremely slow to take action, in my opinion, as they have been on other issues that have been threats to national security, whether it was foreign terrorist organizations like ISIS back in 2014, 2015, now domestic terrorist and extremist organizations, and Russian and other foreign influence. They've been slow, but they are starting to respond, at least the major platforms like Facebook and Twitter to a certain extent. They're taking down more content. They're putting warnings on certain content as disinformation, and they are taking down, I just saw a number of sites taken down. I think it was today, I read this morning also, that were deemed to be disinformation. And they really, I know they never intended their platforms to be used this way, but they built them in ways that were vulnerable to this type of use. And so they have a responsibility to counter this. But the American people also have a responsibility to recognize that not everything they see on social media is true, and not everything is being promoted by whatever name is on it. By now, we all, I'm sure, have seen the stories about personas being frankly stolen of Americans to create new social media to propagate disinformation. And so people have to be very careful about where they consume their media. And I would suggest taking a little vacation from social media would be a pretty good idea right about now.
Thank you, Mary.
Here.
Yeah. The only thing I would add to what Mary has said is that, I've always had the sense that the Russians and the Iranians and perhaps the Chinese, they are more interested in sowing discord. And I think they do want to try to influence messages more than anything else. And this is one area where maybe our decentralized system of elections may accrue to our benefit, and that it would be very hard for a hostile actor like the Russians to, invade or manipulate our tally systems, because there's not one central location where they could do this. Now, maybe they could invade a state system or a large county, but it'd be hard to do this on a national basis. So again, I think it's more about the messages that they're trying to, create this discord among ourselves and delegitimize our system of, democratic capitalism, this republic that we have, they want to be able to point and say, see, and when candidates say, hey, the system's rigged, and they question the outcome, well, that plays right into the Russians' hands. They want us saying those sorts of things. They want us to they want to question the very legitimacy of democracy as we've known it in this country for these few centuries.
I just wanted to underline what Mary said. One of the things we've been trying to communicate to people, particularly as we approach the election, is you got to choose your news wisely. It's kind of like the food pyramid that we all learned. If you gorge yourself on stuff that's unhealthy, you're going to be unhealthy. So push away from the table. I took Facebook off my phone some months ago because I just was tired of it, and political discourse, anything resembling of a civil nature, just doesn't exist there anymore. So, but again, this is where I say to people, trust your local sources, trust folks that you already know, not some random, probably bot that you've encountered on Twitter or social media. But we're all vulnerable to that. The other thing I'd say to Charlie's point is, a plug for an act that Pennsylvania did. Actually, Charlie and I were on a Blue Ribbon Commission on cybersecurity in elections, and one of our strong recommendations in Pennsylvania is that Pennsylvania needed across the board to have voting machines that had a paper backup, a paper trail, which formerly we didn't. And we were sort of working under this illusion that we could go back and recount votes somehow, which someone said was like pushing the equal sign twice on your calculator. It was not a real audit, as it were. And now we have that. So credit to the governor and the legislature for taking that step. So there's work to do, but it's important to recognize that we're a little better off than we were.
Thank you. And so, Dick, we lost you for a little bit in your answer, so didn't catch the end of your answer. If you wanted to add to what you've just heard, otherwise we'll move on to another question.
No, go to another question. That's fine.
Okay, thank you. A little technical glitches here and there. So Pennsylvania, let's kind of bring this home to Pennsylvania. Pennsylvania is clearly a key battleground state, and folks from around the world are watching us. I know at the University of Scranton, I've heard from journalists from Japan and Spain and France and Australia, very interested in what's happening in our elections, and particularly here in Pennsylvania, and particularly in Scranton. So why is Pennsylvania so important this year in this election? So why is it that we have so much attention on us, and Philadelphia is being brought in the news, and Luzerne County situation, and why is Pennsylvania so important this year? David, do you want to start?
Sure. It's a big state that is really hard to figure out, and we're earning our nickname as the Keystone State. I put a plug in I wrote a piece for CNN Online a little bit about a week ago, trying to gather my thoughts about the intricacies of campaigning in Pennsylvania and our political personalities. And I remembered a line ascribed to George Wallace when he was campaigning for president back in 1972. And he said, a fella could campaign his entire life in Pennsylvania and still not know what the hell he was doing. It's a big state. It's a diverse state. It's not an urban state. It has a high rural population, very different political personalities. So that's brought a lot of journalists, as this race is shaping up, and there will be more. And I just have to say, my favorite encounter with a journalist on that was in 2016. I got a call from a Swedish journalist who wanted to cover election fraud in Pennsylvania and wanted to know where exactly that would be taking place. So I was a little bemused by that question. I wasn't sure what to quite to do with it, but tried to help her out. So just be prepared, they're coming.
Thank you. Charlie, any comment in terms of why Pennsylvania is so important this year and is getting so much attention?
Well, because we were the pivotal state in 2016. At the end of the day, Pennsylvania was the one that actually delivered the election the Electoral College to Donald Trump on election night. So all eyes were on Pennsylvania then, and now I think that's partly why. And it is truly a state that is a challenge. It's a big state, 20 electoral votes, and I think it's for all those reasons that David had stated. We are that place, and I'm surprised, David, you said that George Wallace was so confused by Pennsylvania. He apparently didn't talk to James Carville, who said that Pennsylvania was Philadelphia and Pittsburgh with Alabama in between, and he's an Alabama governor. You should have known better. Actually, Carville didn't say Philadelphia and Pittsburgh. He said from Paoli to Penn Hills with Alabama in between, but what the hell. So,
I try not to remember James Carville much, Charlie, for reasons
I understand.
we don't need to go into.
Jean, I'm not from Pennsylvania, but I have a thought I'd like to share with folks. I think everything that David and Charlie have just said points up one of the fundamental problems with the way we actually administer the Electoral College, which is that every state has winner take all, every state but two, which means, when you have a state as diverse as Pennsylvania, when you have Democrats and Republicans in a state in as close sort of quantities or measures as you do in Pennsylvania, I think, it's just a travesty that, the winner of the state gets all of the electoral votes, even if the vote is 49-51, the 51% winner gets all 20 votes. And that's the way it is across the country. And as we know, the last two elections, the winner of the popular vote did not win the Electoral College. Well, something is wrong with our system when that is what is happening on a repeated basis. And this is by state law. It doesn't have to be this way. The Electoral College is baked into the Constitution. We can't change that, but the method of assigning your electors in every state is up to the states. And I'm going to make a pitch, as I've done before with some of the folks on this webinar, is, there is a movement, a national popular vote movement, by which states can pledge that they would pledge all of their electors to the winner of the national popular vote. And there's a number of states that have already signed up for that. And it only kicks into being when enough states have signed up that they would actually get the 270 votes needed to win an election. And then those states of pledge will go with the national popular vote. So, I think this is the kind of thing that we need to be having more discussion about. It's too late right now, of course, but I think, a lot of people feel like their vote is not likely to count if all the votes in their state go with the winner and they, support the other candidate. And that drives people away from voting, frankly, which is not what any of us want.
I want to agree with Mary. We've had two elections in the last few years that have been decided for the Electoral College winner, not the national winner on the votes. This is corrosive. If this keeps happening, it is really corrosive. You've got an election going on now where there are no ads being run. There are no appearances by candidates in most of the states. The only states that are seeing candidates and ads are states like Pennsylvania, because they're the battleground states that will tell the tale. And this is not good. I saw an edit in one of the papers today where somebody from California said they were tired of being disregarded entirely in presidential elections. And that's the case. Now, we know why it is. We know why that compromise was made when the Constitution was written. But as Mary said, there's an effort ongoing to have the national popular vote be the winner. And so I hope that more states, I think 16 states have already passed that kind of a law. So there's not a lot more to get to 270, and that would really change it.
And so with that in mind, are you optimistic? I hope you are optimistic that local, state, and national governments are learning from this election and are going to be willing to revise their election laws. We've heard of lots of concerns, and it is, as Charlie said, it's a very decentralized process. And so different states allow drop boxes and some don't. And state laws on open carry laws means people may be standing at the polls with guns. And so it's very state level. So are you optimistic that we may see some changes in election laws, national or state level? And what revisions do you think need to happen? What are the top one or two revisions that you would like to see in how we run elections in the state of Pennsylvania, in states across the country, and national elections. I've lost track of where to start. I think we start with Charlie on this one. And Charlie.
Well, good. Hey, just let me just say one other thing too. You asked in the previous question about Pennsylvania being a pivotal state. I'm going to ask our viewers here to think about Georgia. I just have a feeling that they're going to have a runoff in a Senate election down there. That could be very important. It's a very tight situation down there. That keep an eye on that state in this cycle, perhaps more than others. And the question, I guess the question was, have we learned anything here? I think the one, I'm afraid we are going to learn a lesson, but it'll be too late. And I think it speaks to the issue. Maybe it was David who mentioned it, at least in Pennsylvania, that the legislature and the governor have not been able to come to an agreement about counting these votes, a few days or a week or two prior, to the election, given the mail-in volumes. I'm just so fearful that it's going to take forever and a day to count all these mail-in votes, and we'll simply and a week after the election, we'll say, well, why didn't they allow them to count the votes before the election that were mailed in? I mean, that's going to be the obvious question. Why didn't they do anything about it when they knew this was going to be a problem? So the question is, I think, yes, lessons will be learned, but I'm fearful that we're going to learn lessons after this election, because some of the anticipated chaos, and I hope it doesn't happen, but some of that anticipated mayhem and chaos, might have been mitigated or perhaps prevented.
Yeah. My response to that question is it's too soon to tell, and not to veer into the cynical, but a lot of folks, and maybe I do, ascribe to, I'll call what Charlie described as the train wreck school of public policy, which is a train wreck occurs, and then you react to the train wreck and trying to avoid it next time around. And we don't know yet whether we're going to see a train wreck in Pennsylvania or elsewhere. Let's hope we don't. There are a lot of election directors and governors out there that are praying that it won't. If it does happen, it doesn't happen in their state. But that would be a great shame because I think we can anticipate now. We have been able to anticipate for the last few years some of the challenges that we have, and but that seems to be what the system responds to.
Dick or Mary, would you like to respond to that? Any specific election law changes you would like to see? I know Mary is talking about modifying how we do the Electoral College. Other laws, either at the county level, state level, national level, that you think we need to modify?
I would hope that the federal government would put some serious money into the states to improve the election infrastructure. We talked before about foreign actors getting into our system. This is just a matter of money, and a lot of the states with their budgets today don't have that money. I saw the other day that the Chan Zuckerberg Foundation has given $400 million, which is more than the federal government's done in this cycle, to pay for better election infrastructure, to train poll workers, and to recruit poll workers. And I think a lot of that money has gone into Pennsylvania.
Yeah.
That's just, what are we doing? The government has a responsibility to have valid elections. It's probably their highest responsibility. So I hope the federal government will get serious about this after this election.
I mean, we've obviously said a lot of complimentary things about local election officials, and I think they deserve it. And it really is a shame that, they've been toiling in the vineyards without getting a lot of respect, without getting the funding, with enormous demands, political and administrative on them. And it is time that we take this seriously, because I totally agree with Dick. This is the underpinning of the whole democratic exercise. And if the lesson coming out of this is we just simply have to dig in and find ways to restore people's confidence, funding would be one way to do that.
Thank you. Mary, would you like to add to to this
Well, I
part of the
made one
conversation.
pitch, but if I get another, I'm going to make another. You know, the Supreme Court gutted Section 5 of the Voting Rights Act several years ago. And I think that history since then has shown they were quite wrong to do that. Now, obviously, that hasn't applied in every state, but that was a procedure by which states that had a history of voter suppression had to clear changes in their election laws where they could implement them. And, you know, just simplified down to its bare bones, the Supreme Court's invalidation of that was basically based on it wasn't needed anymore. Well, I think what we've seen since then shows us how very much it is needed, because in some of the states that had the worst history of voter suppression immediately started enacting laws that continue to disenfranchise people and continue to make it more and more difficult for people to vote, particularly people of color, minority populations. And so I think we really need to, Congress needs at a federal level to really revisit how they might replace that.
Thank you. So we've got about, by my clock here, at least about 10 minutes left. So I think I'll ask one more question. Everybody has about a minute if they want to respond. And then we'll kind of pull things to a close. So for young Americans, including most college students, this will be the first time that they will cast a vote in a presidential election, maybe any election. What do you want to say to new voters, whether it's because they're young or just people who haven't voted in the past and decided to vote this year? It seems like those numbers are increasing. What do you want to say to them about this election and the importance of their votes? And so we'll start with Dick.
Well, our ancestors 240 years ago put in at the federal level 535 people in the room, not one. They created a democracy. It's the oldest and most successful democracy in history. And as Ben Franklin said in Philadelphia, I believe, we have a republic if we can keep it. Every generation has to be part of keeping it. And so young people need to at least vote, if not take a greater role in civic and public life in their communities. And so my hope is that young people in this election will take it seriously. They will all show up and vote however long it takes to do that, and will keep this great republic alive. We will not like the alternative to democracy if that's where we wind up. I can assure you of that.
Thank you. Mary, would you like to add to that?
I think that, I mean, the main thing I'd say is vote. But I think what we've seen this year, particularly in the wake of the killing of George Floyd, is we've seen an amazing surge of young people getting involved in political activity. Young people have come out across the country for racial justice. And that, you know, that's important. That's exercising their First Amendment rights to demonstrate. And that's one feature of our democracy. Another way they can make sure their voices are heard is to vote. And so I think, you know, on that wave of exercising those important constitutional rights and using their voices to try to affect change, they've got to understand the other important way to affect change is by voting. And so I hope that, you know, they will kind of like see these things as hand in hand and will know it's their responsibility and will want to take that responsibility and want to get out there and make their voices be heard, just as they have been in cities across the country in favor of racial justice. What they started there can only continue if they vote.
Thank you. David, would you like to
Sure.
comment?
I'm a big believer. I started out my professional career as a social studies teacher, teaching 7th and 8th graders. So this brings me back. But I'm a big believer that the best way to encourage people to vote or to engage productively in civic life is to point to other folks around them their age who are doing just that. And two examples here in Philadelphia, one of our great public high schools is Central High School. And there was a feature story about a social studies teacher named Tom Quinn at Central in the Philadelphia Inquirer. And we know Tom, he's worked with us and he has sort of a one-man Pied Piper, gotten his students involved in voter registration efforts. We've actually helped them do online Facebook candidate interviews with people running for the state house here in Philadelphia. So again, bringing them into the fold, giving them the tools to do what they do, and make them feel a part of the effort. The other example is something just last night. If you can see on the front of our van there, it says "Draw the Lines, PA." This is a massive civic engagement effort around the issue of gerrymandering and redistricting reform. And we've basically got about 6,000 citizens over the last 4 years, most of them young people, involved in actually drawing election maps themselves. And we had an awards ceremony last night, and we gave out some young folks, high school students, won $5,000 because they produced really good, really fair, transparent maps. And it's heartwarming to see those folks and hear their stories and understand, to Dick's point, the commitment they have to sort of carrying the torch forward. So I think it's just really important that we recognize the energy that's out there and amplify it and reward it.
And you're going to send all of those maps to the state legislature, right? So they have some maps to
Actually,
draw from after the
yeah, we
census.
will. There's 6,000
Charlie,
people,
did you
a lot
want
of them in your backyard.
I'll be very
Charlie.
brief. I'll be very brief. We've, for years, it's always great to see the youthful energy and enthusiasm of young people as it relates to the political process. But my only comment, and it's really maybe more of an admonition, but I just hope that these young people actually show up and vote. I mean, go out and do it. I know a lot of energy, a lot of talk, but they still, turn out at disappointingly low rates. And I suspect that may be the case again this election. But if anything, the best thing I could recommend is that these young people actually do it. Just go out and vote.
And I have to say, as a college professor and interacting with young students, at least college students, they are very engaged. And I think starting with the shootings where the young people developed, really pushed for gun control laws. We really have seen momentum of young people getting engaged in politics and formal politics, registering people to vote, but also the informal politics, the protesting and whatnot. And so I am optimistic. I want to end on an optimistic note. So Mary and I at least are optimistic. So thank you all for being with us tonight. On behalf of Keep Our Republic, who actually pulled this all together, Keep Our Republic, the Schemmel Forum, and the University of Scranton, I want to thank you all for joining us tonight. And of course, thank you all for voting in any other way you can engage in politics between now and forever. So thank you very much. And don't forget to vote if you have not already. Good evening.